New York Giants tight end Darren Waller might just be the biggest winner of all players from the preseason. We explain why next on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
About to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $5 and $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can check her out on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also follow her work on Pro Football Focus. She's got a really good article out right now on the one player that you should avoid in your drafts. So go check it out. But Kate, today we are talking about some winners and losers from the tight end position in the preseason. And you and I are in complete agreement here. Tell us why Darren Waller might just be the biggest winner of the preseason.
Here's the thing, Marcus. I feel like nobody's talking about Darren Waller as a dynasty winner per se, because the man is about to turn 31 years old. But I just want to just level back real quick and look at the age of most of these dynasty tight ends that we're ranking in the top 10. Travis Kelce about to turn 34. Mark Andrews about to turn 28. Dallas Goedert about to turn 29. George Kittle about to turn 30. Age is not a thing, apparently, when it comes
Not
to the
for tight
top
ends.
10 dynasty
Remember-
tight ends. So
Remember when Jason Witten was like 45 and still getting 100 catches a season?
yeah, I do think that the thing holding people back from Darren Waller is obviously some injury concerns there, but he is fully healthy. But also I think we're getting a little ageist here while forgetting that all of these other tight ends ranked in a similar tier are pretty close to him in age. There's not that big of a gap. But I mean, Darren Waller, we've heard the reports all off season long. It's been Darren Waller, Daniel Jones. This is the identity of this offense right now. And we only saw that further shown throughout the preseason. Targeted on 50% of his routes with the first team, ranked top 3 among tight ends. This is he's one of 2 tight ends literally to be targeted on more than 45% of routes throughout the preseason. When Darren Waller is on the field, he is that team's glorified wide receiver 1. He's been so reliable in terms of scoring when he's on the field. It's not much of a question, right? When he's active, you start him and you're going to get a tight end 1 production. He's finished as a tight end 1 in 61% of his games played over the last 3 seasons. That ranks 3rd among tight ends, only behind Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews. Then it's Darren Waller. That's ahead of TJ Hawkinson, George Kittle, Dallas Goedert. He has been absolutely elite when he is on the field. I don't think that this is really any different than what we've seen in years past. And if anything, this might be a career season for Darren Waller if he can stay healthy. Really encouraged to hear that, he hasn't dealt with a lot of health struggles since being in New York, but he is a focal point of this offense. And very real shot that this guy ends up as the overall tight end 3 this season. Forget age. When I'm in a dynasty league, I want that position secured. And I think as long as Darren Waller is on the field, he is a top 5 tight end.
I mean, I agree with everything you said. Now, I tried not to overreact to the preseason because more often than not, it just actually clouds our judgment. But when you watch the Giants preseason game with the first team offense play, they went right down the field and Darren Waller got a target on every other play. Basically, it's yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you throw the ball to Darren Waller all the time? He's open. He gets open. Nobody can cover him one-on-one. And he's just the best pass catcher this team has. And it just fits so well with Daniel Jones because he gets quick separation. He's open across the middle of the field. It's not a challenging throw. This one almost seems like it's too easy. And the only thing that scares you is the health. But I also wonder, like, some of the health stuff that happened over the last couple of years, I wonder how much it was related to the contract stuff. He wanted a new contract from the Raiders. He held out for a new contract. Once he got the deal, he wasn't really in shape and pulled his hamstring. And there's just a lot of things that led to that. But he's healthy now. And can I just think every week outside of Travis Kelce and outside of Mark Andrews, he's got like the highest upside in any single week because he's going to get a ridiculous amount of targets. And we've seen him be really effective before. I love Darren Waller. I was telling you pre-show, I made a trade in a dynasty league that I'm in. I traded away Kyle Pitts because I had Darren Waller. And my reasoning was, yes, I have Kyle Pitts ranked higher, but I'm going to play Darren Waller every single week, kind of moving forward until I see more from Kyle Pitts. And I can move Kyle Pitts and get something else to help me out. I want to play Darren Waller in my dynasty leagues this year. I think he's going to have a massive year.
I do think that, like, when it comes to evaluating, like, in valuing age for a player, there's not a position that I care less about age than when it comes to the tight end position
100%.
in terms of dynasty. Like, generally speaking, we see these guys peak at age 27, 28, 29. Age is kind of irrelevant for this position. This is when we really start to see these players often hit their stride. And we've seen with Travis Kelce, we've seen Jason Witten. I'm not saying that Darren Waller is the same kind of tight end, but what I am saying is that we've seen plenty of tight ends play well into their career. And I do think that Darren Waller is in a really good spot. I think, if you're not going to have one of these top tier tight ends, you can draft Darren Waller probably as like the tight end 7, tight end 8 in your leagues because of that age factor, because of those health concerns. I think he's going to be a huge value. And he's going to be a league winning tight end. And like, he's going to be a player that you're just going to leave in that tight end spot. He's one of the least expensive and pricey assets that you're going to be able to just plug and play without question on a week to week basis. And for me, that's a league winning value.
Yeah, tight end 8 right now. He's actually slipped a little bit. We've seen Pat Freiermuth gain some momentum here to potentially pass him. Sam Laporta jumping up. So you're not even paying top 5 prices to get Darren Waller. And the last thing before we move on, and I know, listen, I get this is a flawed way to look at tight ends. But if you look at some of his big games over the last 3 years, 13 for 200 and 2 touchdowns, 9 for 150 and 2 touchdowns, 13 for 134, 7 for 126 and 2 touchdowns, 9 for 122 and 2 touchdowns. How many other tight ends right now going into the season have that kind of upside? Obviously, Travis Kelce, obviously, Mark Andrews. Outside of those two, like, I love Kyle Pitts. He's not getting a 13 catch game in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, I think George Kittle is probably the one player you can argue in the mix of that, but we've seen George Kittle have a very low floor for fantasy as well. So that's where I argue Darren Waller over George Kittle, because has that same kind of upside, right? But I do think the floor is so much higher for Darren Waller, especially in a full PPR league,
100%.
because there is, I would bet a lot of money that Darren Waller is going to lead this team in targets, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns if he's healthy for a full season.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure, like, on a per game basis, if anybody's going to come within like 3 targets of him per game. Like, I can honestly see a situation, Kate, where Darren Waller, like, every single week is somewhere between 8 to 12 targets, and it just depends a little bit on the game script. Like, if they get behind, he's getting more targets. But you're basically telling me, can he get 2 targets a quarter? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's going to be drives where he gets 4 targets right in a row. So I'm all in on Darren Waller, one of the biggest winners of the preseason. Another winner that we saw, this is a player that only played a handful of snaps, but you've got to include him. We will get to him next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. I actually just did this bet. It's absolutely, I just logged into this. It's so cool. Placed a couple bets on Trevor Lawrence to win MVP. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can you can bet on everything from the spreads to player props to futures bets like I like. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Every day, Kate and I are going to have a special show for you tomorrow. We're going to talk about the players who we expect to see the biggest jump in ADP, the biggest risers at this time next year. So you're not going to want to miss that. But Kate, let's talk about another winner from preseason. Who do you got?
Got to be Jake Ferguson, tight end for the Dallas Cowboys, who, like you alluded to, did not actually play all that much this preseason, but in a limited playing time, I think just validated so many of the things that I really liked about Jake Ferguson last season. He's a second-year tight end, obviously very young, generally inexperienced, but you gotta like literally everything you've seen from this kid. The team obviously brought in second round tight end Luke Schoonmaker. There's Peyton Hendershot, who did he make the final 53?
He did. He was close. He almost, I don't think he was going to make it unless there was another injury that happened to a guy named John Stevens. So Hendershot is like a borderline active player on the 53-man roster.
So there's not a whole ton of competition here. Now I know earlier this offseason, the team made a trade for Brandon Cooks, bring in some speed, but I do think what we've seen from Dak Prescott, his propensity for targeting the tight end, Jake Ferguson's efficiency as a receiver, caught 20 of 23 targets in his rookie season, 208 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, led all Cowboys tight ends in passer rating when targeted, yards per route run, yards after the catch per reception. Now he comes in, he was targeted, went on the field with Dak Prescott at an absurd rate, caught all 3 of his targets, 38 receiving yards, but targeted on 37.5% of his routes run, which is a fantastic barometer. Just you love that involvement. All 3 of those targets, I think just further emphasize that Dak Prescott, just because Dalton Schultz is no longer in this offense, he's not going away from the tight end. Literally ranked 3rd among all tight ends in PFF receiving grade for the preseason in those limited snaps. I'm not sure there's any tight end that I'm looking at more closely this offseason in terms of, being one of these potential dynasty values. I mean, you look, he's made, a little bit of a climb this offseason in my rankings for sure. But generally speaking, tight end 29 in Dynasty startup ADP for the month of August, he's climbing for me. But still, I think people are a little bit nervous about the additional bodies that this team has added into the mix. What the most recent trade, which just occurred a couple of days ago, one team traded Jake Ferguson straight up for Loon Schoonmaker. I want your thoughts on that, Marcus.
I agree. I would much rather have Jake Ferguson than Luke Schoonmaker. You want some little inside information here on some Jake Ferguson news?
Yes.
So Dak Prescott has a fully functioning football field in his backyard by the Cowboys Stadium. Okay. They call it the Dak yard, right? And he holds
that's cute. Backyard. Look at him.
Yeah. And he holds workouts, not only with Cowboy players, but just like other receivers and tight ends and running backs. Ezekiel Elliott was present at all these, all off season long. The one player that did not miss a single workout in the Dak yard, Jake Ferguson. Dak loves him, and they love his ability to make plays after the catch. They're going to have him, going in to the flats, giving him targets. He was actually one of PFF's top-rated players after the catch last season. But now they're making him more of a downfield threat. You're going to see him running down the seam. You're going to see him doing some more longer developing routes to get that A dot up a little bit. And I think he might be the number 2 target in the red zone behind CeeDee Lamb. So I feel comfortable enough saying I would start Jake Ferguson as my tight end 1 in some fantasy leagues this year, like 12-team leagues, 14-team leagues. I have no problem starting him. And if you can get him at tight end 29 price, I mean, come on. It's just a 24-year-old with a really good pedigree from Wisconsin. I'm all in.
There's not a lot to dislike about Jake Ferguson just in general. Like you look at the draft capital in terms of Dynasty, like that is a throwaway pick. That is that is absolutely no risk, so much reward, I think, in an offense that Marcus, as you tweeted the other day, with Dak Prescott leads the league in points per game. Like there's going to be a lot of scoring potential in this offense.
And Dak loves throwing to the tight end in the red zone. Like we've seen this every year with Dalton Schultz. I think the tight ends last year scored 14 combined touchdowns or something ridiculous. Like there's going to be opportunities. And the last thing, Kate, and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no.
Luke Schoonmaker, who the Cowboys took in the second round, they envision him more as a blocker who can do some like outlet stuff as a receiver and like, hey, he's going to block 30 snaps and then he's going to get a target when you're not expecting him. Not a fully featured tight end. Peyton Hendershot, I think there's going to be weeks where he's just inactive. Sean McEwen, another tight end that they have on the practice squad, he's another blocker type. Ferguson is going to be the guy getting all the targets here from the tight end position.
I love it. I'm so far in, Marcus, like this might be a player I need to mute myself on rest of off season because I loved what we've seen so far, but I do think that, the preseason, even in that limited span, has just validated all of that potential that we saw. And I love that nugget about Jake Ferguson and the Dak yard.
Yeah.
That's a great piece of insider
That's why you listen to Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
Yeah.
I just want to mention one more tight end really quickly. I thought Dalton Kincaid looked as good as advertised. I mean, you're not going to be able to cover him in one-on-one situations. I just want to see what that target share looks like. I want to see how often they're using him because they do still have Dawson Knox. But in terms of the player and the role, I mean, I couldn't be more impressed from what I saw in the preseason.
Yeah, I totally agree. I one of these players that I'm starting to come around on, I think a lot more. I was a little bit more hesitant just with Dawson Knox, but I do think it's becoming more and more clear that I think Dawson Knox could potentially steal some touchdowns, but especially in full PPR scoring formats, Dalton Kincaid is the future. I don't know how great I feel about the price point. He's being drafted. It's expensive. But it, again, has some, I think, high upside that you're betting to pay off. I think that's kind of where I'm at. There's not a whole lot I think that fantasy managers would have been surprised at. But it's so great to see, like, when the preseason, it's hard to take away new observations regarding players in the preseason, generally speaking. But I do think it's better, a tool to maybe, compare against sort of your perceived ideas about this team going into those games and see like, okay, how does what we've seen in the preseason match up with what I projected for this team? And I think that Kincaid is the perfect example of the preseason really kind of just validating some of those ideas we had earlier on.
All right, let's talk about one of the losers from the tight end position next. All right, Kate, wrapping up here. There were some winners that we liked. We really liked Jake Ferguson. We really liked Dalton Kincaid. We love what Darren Waller did for the Giants. But was there a tight end that you saw in the preseason that you're just a little discouraged about?
Yeah, it's Dalton Schultz, new tight end for
It's
the
all these
Houston
Daltons.
Texans. Now we've already talked about Dalton Schultz a little bit, sort of by proxy, in our discussion of the Dallas Cowboys. Like Dalton Schultz was a very big part of that passing game for Dallas, and I was super excited to see what he might be able to do with this Houston Texans offense. Like there's no, when I'm trying to sort of identify a potential sleeper or a player of value at the tight end position, I'm considering what is the competition for targets like? Is
Mhm.
there a tried and true wide receiver 1 in this team, wide receiver 2? How established is this pecking order? And I think the Texans have generally been a team that don't, there's not necessarily an established pecking order yet, but Dalton Schultz, throughout the preseason, didn't start the last 2 preseason games when we saw like a full mix of starters, including, Dameon Pierce, has been rotating through with Tegan. I don't even know how to say it. Quitoriano, I
Sure.
think is how you say his name.
And Brevin
Who
Jordan, we can't forget Brevin Jordan, who's still hanging around as the tight end 3 there.
Yes, like there's more competition there. Brevin Jordan, he's missed the preseason with a hamstring, but definitely when on the field, when healthy, he's also going to figure into this rotation. And I really, I think, the fact that Schultz hasn't necessarily stood out among this competition, the fact that he hasn't necessarily, been dominate in his snap share.
Mhm.
I feel like things are just trending kind of poorly for Dalton Schultz, who's a guy that has generally been very involved as a receiver. I'm not saying like it can't happen this season, but I'm not encouraged by what we've seen. The usage this preseason, there's really no bit of news that has had me excited for Dalton
Well,
Schultz this
do you
offseason.
remember at this time last year, we were talking about Dalton Schultz's dynasty value, and we were talking about him as like tight end 8 and tight end 9, and because on a points per game basis, he was outperforming George Kittle. And now you're at a point with him being at tight end 18. It's like, I mean, he's almost a borderline rosterable player, and I just don't know if you can trust him from week to week in your fantasy leagues. And I just don't know what the upside is. Like, is this somebody who is going to see a significant target share in Houston? I would guess not. Kate, if it was me and I'm looking at the tight end position right now, I would much rather gamble on somebody like Trey McBride, who's going as tight end 19. Obviously, Jake Ferguson, who we just mentioned. I would take Jawan Johnson for the Saints at tight end 25 over Dalton Schultz. I just, with a rookie quarterback and an offense that I think is going to struggle, I just don't think I want any part of Dalton Schultz right now.
That makes me so sad. I really do. I love Dalton Schultz as a player. I think he's a fun receiving tight end to watch. Um, so I'm bummed by this. I'm not saying that it can't happen. Obviously, like this team, I think has a lot of room to grow in terms of development. And as CJ Stroud, I think continues to get more comfortable in the starting role. Like I think we saw him. The moment looked a little bit big for him
A little bit.
in his preseason, maybe compared to like a Bryce Young, who even Anthony Richardson, who looked, didn't necessarily
Flashed.
make the best decisions, but he looked unfazed. Like
Yep.
Stroud looked a little bit more rattled, I think, by the bigness of this moment. So maybe we start to see, things transition later on in the season as things take shape. But uh, if Dalton Schultz, my tight end sleeper was the guy I was kind of like banking on, I'm definitely looking for other
Looking
options,
elsewhere.
and that other option is probably Jake Ferguson.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Again, everydayers, we'll be back tomorrow to talk about the players that we expected to make the biggest leap going into the 2023 season, the biggest risers for the 2024 offseason. So be sure to tune in for that. Go check out the show on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Go check out Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. Again, go look at her work on Pro Football Focus. She's got articles up every single day over there, just getting you ready for your fantasy drafts. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.